Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So I've got some interesting stories today. I definitely want to talk about the slap on the wrist. Literally, well, I guess not literally, but figuratively, a slap on the wrist to General David Petraeus. I will explain why his supposed punishment is only a slap on the wrist. But first, let's look at shooting fish in a barrel. That is how it was described in Honolulu when Honolulu police earlier this month went car to car issuing citations for cell phone use. The story here comes from the Free Thought Project. They write, according to motorists, police moved into the middle of the street during the worst traffic jam in years and began writing a ticket writing assembly line that made over $18,000. In total, 65 drivers were given tickets that amounted to $290 apiece. In an extreme traffic situation like this, they write, it is understandable for people to use their cell phones to contact loved ones and rearrange their plans. This is especially important for those who are responsible for taking care of children or elderly people. Police representatives admit that the ticketing strategy was unfair, but they claim that this operation was pre-planned and that the officers were not opportunistically taking advantage of the traffic jam. In fact, police representatives told local reporters that they were totally unaware of the highway, or rather that the highway was in gridlock. This is despite the fact that it should have been obvious to the officers that were on the streets, as well as to their supervisors back at headquarters. Tiffany Breeden told reporters after she was ticketed, quote, this cop was walking the highway and motioning for these cars to move into the gas station parking lot. They had an assembly line of cops giving tickets. Honolulu Police Department Assistant Chief Clayton Keu said that the whole thing was just one giant misunderstanding, saying, quote, at the time they were doing that, they weren't aware of the traffic problem. When they were notified at that point, they ceased enforcement action. How exactly were you not aware of the traffic problem when you had a police officer on foot in the middle of a highway telling cars to pull into a gas station parking lot? How was he not aware that there's a traffic jam going on or that there's a traffic problem? If he is that dense to where he cannot realize that traffic is basically sitting still so that he can walk up and down the middle of the highway, then maybe he doesn't need to be somebody with a little badge and a gun going out to enforce laws, because he's probably too dense to realize what the laws are, or that people aren't actually violating them in a lot of cases. But no, you can't question that, because if you ever question why a police officer wrote a ticket in court, then the prosecutor will object and say that calls for a legal conclusion. But yet police make legal conclusions all the time when they arrest someone or write them a ticket. The article here continues. Tiffany Breeden, who was previously quoted, said she's not buying their story. Quote, I knew about it at noon in my office in Honolulu, and I'm not even a cop patrolling the streets. How are they unaware of the street conditions? During a press conference earlier this month, Captain Darren Izumo admitted guilt, saying that the operation should have been canceled, saying, quote, I'll take the hit for that, in that we were concentrating on getting the westbound traffic flowing, so I failed to cancel the operation. End quote. Even after admitting that the tickets should not have been issued to begin with, the police department is still refusing to void the tickets. Instead, they are asking commuters to fight the tickets in court and take their chances with the judge. Yes, you heard that right. The police admitted we never should have written you this ticket, but we're not going to void the ticket. Here's your court date. Go, and hopefully the judge will void it for you or say not guilty. Now, what they could do in this situation, instead of being nice, decent humans and avoiding the tickets that never should have been written, is when they tell the people the court date, they simply refuse to have the officer that wrote the ticket go to court, and then there's no witness to testify against you, and the ticket will be dismissed. I've known several people who have had tickets dismissed in situations very similar, not where they had a police officer walk up to their window in a standstill traffic jam, they're on the phone, and then get handed a ticket for using their cell phone while operating a vehicle. Not that extreme, but people getting speeding tickets or parking violation or some other sort of minor infraction. They take it to court. The police officer that wrote the ticket did not show up, and then the ticket wound up getting dismissed because there was no person to testify against them, and so it got dismissed. In one case, the court hearing was supposed to have begun at 9 o'clock. The officer was not there, and the judge kept postponing and postponing. We'll give him until noon. We'll take a recess. If he's not here by the time we come back from lunch, then we'll dismiss it. So wound up spending like half a day with one of my friends in court because I was going to film his trial for him, and ultimately wound up getting dismissed because the police officer never showed up. But I guarantee you, if you were supposed to be at court at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're not there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then you're not there at 9:15, and then you're not there at 10 o'clock, and you're not there at 11, they're not going to say, oh, we'll give him until after lunch. No, right away they put out you missed court, and then they put out the warrant for missed court date. And I've actually known people where that happened, to where they had court at 9 o'clock in the morning, they got the days confused, and by noon they had been picked up on the warrant for failure to appear. So when you do it, right away there's a failure to appear, you get arrested. When the police do it, no big deal. We'll just dismiss your charge. But there's never any accountability for the police missing the court hearings. No, we can't actually do that. So when we come back in just a moment, I do want to tell you what happened with David Petraeus. He's the guy, former four-star general, former head of the CIA, and as you probably are aware, he gave some classified documents to his mistress, who was writing his biography. And, well, David Petraeus is in a little bit of trouble. And I'll tell you what that little bit of trouble is and why it is only a little bit of trouble. Because when you hear what the punishment is, you might think, oh, well, that's pretty bad. But then I'll explain why it's not so bad when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker will be available on February 19th. Bitcoin Not Bombs is a launching pad for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs into the financial freedom of the Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin Not Bombs offers premium publicity campaigns designed to facilitate an organization's adoption of Bitcoin as a payment system. Bitcoin Not Bombs is fully committed to being the hub of the nonprofit sector of the Bitcoin economy, maximizing the potential cross-promotion of all our clients and commercial partners. To learn more, visit bitcoinnotbombs.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I've got two stories about David Petraeus. The first from Reuters. Former U.S. military commander and CIA director David Petraeus was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay a $100,000 fine, but was spared prison time on Thursday after he pled guilty to mishandling classified information. The retired four-star general apologized as he admitted in federal court in Charlotte, North Carolina, to giving information to his mistress who was writing his biography. He agreed under a plea deal to a misdemeanor charge of unauthorized removal and retention of classified material. U.S. Magistrate Judge David Kiesler raised the fine from the $40,000 that had been recommended to the maximum possible financial penalty for the charge, noting it needed to be higher to be punitive and reflect the gravity of the offense. Kiesler said during the hour-long hearing, "This constitutes a serious lapse of judgment." The guilty plea, writes Reuters, ended an embarrassing chapter for a man described in letters to the court as one of the finest military leaders of his generation. Petraeus, a counterinsurgency expert with a Princeton University doctorate, served stints as the top U.S. commander in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and was once considered a possible vice presidential or presidential candidate. He resigned from the CIA in 2012 after it was revealed that he was having an affair with his biographer, Army Reserve officer Paula Broadwell. Dressed in a dark suit and a blue tie, he showed no emotion as he read from a prepared statement in court. He told reporters after the sentencing, quote, "Today marks the end of 2.5 years of ordeal that resulted from mistakes that I made. As I did in the past, I apologize to those closest to me and many others." Petraeus was accompanied at the hearing by 3 attorneys, but it did not appear that his family members attended. Neither did Broadwell, who lives in Charlotte. Kiesler said the heads of state, senators, and high-ranking U.S. military officials who wrote letters submitted by defense attorneys in support of Petraeus agreed that he had committed a grave but very uncharacteristic error in judgment. The judge said the retired Army general's actions stood in stark contrast to his nearly 4 decades of public service. Petraeus now serves as a chairman for the private equity firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, captive economic and geopolitical think tank, the KKR Global Institute. The White House also continues to consult with him on occasion for advice on national security matters. So, yes, you heard that right. David Petraeus, who, as the head of the CIA, gave his mistress/biographer access to classified information, and he is being consulted by the White House on national security matters. And this is the same White House that made sure that Private Manning went to jail for 35 years, that Edward Snowden can never return to the United States unless he agrees to face trial, and that includes the possibility of the death penalty for basically doing something similar to what David Petraeus did, only instead of giving the information to his mistress, he gave the information to reporters. so that they could give the information to the people that were possibly being spied on. But see, this is different because this is a government employee that he didn't let people know that the government was doing bad things. He just let his mistress look at classified info so that she could write his biography. And let me continue here with the Reuters article before explaining, and I must do this. I must explain why the $100,000 fine is not really that big of a deal to David Petraeus. But I'm going to continue here with the article from Reuters first. Civil liberties and government transparency advocates had questioned the plea deal, saying the government's lenient treatment of Petraeus suggested prosecutors maintain double standards. Defendants in other leak cases have received harsher punishments, including prison. Michael Ratner, a U.S. lawyer who represents WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, said, "A slap on the wrist is the most one could say about what could barely be called a sentence for what could have been treated as serious crimes, including espionage." But Petraeus' attorney, David Kendall, said in court it would have been unprecedented to incarcerate him for the charge he faced, which carries a maximum prison term of 1 year. Kendall said this is not a case about the dissemination to the public of classified information. No classified information appeared in his biography, not a single syllable. A court document signed by Petraeus and prosecutors say that in 2011, just before he became the director of the CIA, the general illegally gave Broadwell access to official binders. Known as black books, the binders contained classified information, including identities of covert officers, code word information, war strategy, intelligence capabilities, diplomatic talks, and information from high-level White House National Security Council meetings, according to court records. Petraeus also was accused of improperly storing classified materials at his Virginia residence and falsely telling the FBI in October 2012 that he had not shared any classified information with his mistress, Paula Broadwell. U.S. prosecutor James Melendres noted that Petraeus had been entrusted with the government's highest secrets. The defendant betrayed that trust, he said. So why is $100,000 not a big deal to David Petraeus? The story here comes from antiwar.com. And they write, Petraeus had asked to enter the courtroom via a back door so he would not be photographed, but he was forced to enter the courthouse in the normal fashion. As happens with bigwigs, Petraeus' lawyers cited the 34 letters of support from other bigwigs sent on his behalf. Petraeus admitted his crimes and apologized to those he hurt. The only surprise of the hearing is that rather than getting slapped with a $40,000 fine, the judge more than doubled the fine to send a message to $100,000. According to Speakerpedia, Petraeus makes upwards of $132,750 for each speech. In other words, this fine meant to be especially harsh so as to send a message about the gravity of Petraeus' crime is about 75% of one speaker's fee for Petraeus. So basically, David Petraeus gives a speech. I don't know how long the speech is. Let's just say it's an hour. So he does 1 hour of work, and he makes $132,750. He pays 75% of that as a fine. It'd basically be the equivalent of me paying $7.50 as punitive damages to send a message.
You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and Numeri supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month or any amount of Bitcoin per month, thanks to the recurring payment options provided by Coinbase. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Coinbase has more than 1 million consumer wallets and is trusted by over 25,000 merchants, including Overstock.com, Khan Academy, Reddit, and of course, FPP. I trust Coinbase. You should too. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So, I've talked here and there about what's been going on in Yemen. And this time, I'm not talking about U.S. drone strikes. This time, about what's going on in Yemen. The Saudi government has been attacking Yemen for the last several weeks. And earlier this week, they had faced criticism for the high civilian death tolls. And on Tuesday, they announced that they were going to end airstrikes against Yemen, claiming that they had accomplished their military objectives. However, by Wednesday morning, Saudi warplanes were once again pounding targets at several sites in Yemen, leaving many people to wonder what the point was of their mission accomplished moment. The Saudis seem keen to rebrand Operation Decisive Storm amid the growing death toll, but it's hard to imagine anyone else will see the new operation as anything but the old operation under a different name. Yemen's Houthis, the primary targets of Saudi strikes, continue to urge a cessation of hostilities and negotiations under UN auspices. The Saudis have publicly insisted that the only way they will end the war is with the reinstallation of former President Hadi, who resigned in January and is now living in exile in Riyadh, awaiting a second shot at being a ruler with no electoral mandate, but with substantial international military backing. That is the story from antiwar.com on Wednesday. And now, today, actually late last night, they posted another article that says, quote, after a Tuesday announcement by Saudi forces that they were ending the strikes against Yemen, they launched a handful of strikes Wednesday. Officials downplayed that too, saying they were winding down the operation. On Thursday, the air campaign seems less wound down than ever, with an increased number of strikes being reported across the nation, at least 20 separate incidents in total. Beginning their strikes at the start of the month, Saudi warplanes have killed over 1,000 people in Yemen, including hundreds of civilians. This is only part of the humanitarian disaster the war is causing. Perhaps the bigger calamity is the long run, or rather in the long run, will be the Saudi-led naval blockade of Yemen, as the nation imports over 90% of its food, almost entirely by sea. Though they aren't formally banning food shipments from entering the country in theory, in practice they virtually halted such shipments, keeping cargo ships stranded off the coast for weeks on end, awaiting interminable searches. And something else that the Saudis are keeping out of Yemen is humanitarian aid. Yes, I know that there was the very limited amount of aid that was sent into Sana'a a couple of weeks ago, where the Red Cross and I believe it was Doctors Without Borders were able to go in to deliver some amounts of humanitarian aid, and the Saudi government basically said, all right, you've got to leave so we can kill more people. And I am guessing that they wound up leaving because I've not heard anything about there being any deaths of aid workers in Yemen, but it's possible that it's happened and somehow it's slipped under my radar because it's not really being reported on that much in the mainstream media. The only place that I'm getting news about what's going on in Yemen is from antiwar.com. And I want to, on the one hand, say it's sad that the mainstream media isn't covering this stuff, but at the same time, it's not really unexpected because the mainstream media doesn't want you to hear about the things going on unless there's some sort of objective to be pushed. And generally, the only time the mainstream media talks about Syria is when they're trying to build up hype for the U.S. government needs to go in there and bomb some people. And I saw a headline that said U.S. strikes have killed 2,000 in Syria. This is the country where there's no boots on the ground, and it's some sort of limited operation. But yeah, 2,000 people have been killed in Syria by the U.S. military, but it's not a war. At what point does killing people with bombs become a war? And yes, I know there's the legal definition of war, which means Congress must pass an authorization declaring war. But here you've got basically President Obama has ordered the military to just kill people, and there's been nearly 2,000 people that have been killed, but it's not a war. Either it's not a war or they're trying to say that it's just another aspect of that global war on terror that has no real defined war zone or real objective other than just kill people until there's no more terrorists, even though that is kind of what makes terrorist. It's called blowback. So if you go and you interfere in people's situations and in their lives, then sooner or later they will get sick of it and they will stand up for themselves and they will fight back. And that is what the U.S. government considers to be terrorism. When people in countries that the U.S. government has been meddling in decide we don't want you meddling here anymore and they fight back, the U.S. government says that's terrorism. We need to end that by meddling in their business even more until they don't do that anymore. So basically, somehow someone in the U.S. government thinks that you can basically give people Stockholm Syndrome by killing enough of their people. Let me hit on this story real quick about the strikes in Syria. Again, news from antiwar.com. Monitor group the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has issued a report on U.S. airstrikes in the country, which began in September. They reported a total of 2,079 deaths in the U.S. and coalition attacks. Among the slain, a large majority were fighters for the Islamic State or suspected to be fighters for the Islamic State, some 1,922 of them. Another 90 were members of Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's faction inside Syria, while only 66 were listed as civilians, and that includes 10 children. The civilian deaths were almost entirely in territory held by the Islamic State, where U.S. planes have regularly attacked civilian infrastructure, including grain silos and oil refineries in Raqqa province. The Pentagon has insisted it would investigate claims of civilian casualties, but did not believe any of the claims so far were credible. The U.S. has similarly labeled the Nusra fighters as Khorasan, though this appears to be a term invented entirely by the U.S. to try to convince Syrian rebel factions that Nusra was not a target in the war. In the war that's not a war because, no, we've not had war since the 1940s. Hey, this is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online, fppradio.com. Tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday.